Hey everybody, we are going to be taking a look today at, in the Napoleonic universe, the battle that seems to get the most attention, that is the Battle of Waterloo, and we are going to be taking a look at comparing two different editions looking at this battle from Clash of Arms. The first edition of the Battle of Mont Saint Jean, which was published back in 1992, and of course their second edition, which was published this year. Let's take a look. So I have to admit that this particular game from Clash of Arms is one of my favorites. The version that came out back in 1992, I think I've probably played that particular battle in various scenarios a dozen times over the course of the last several decades. Of course, it's a compelling battle for the same reason that Waterloo is important for a lot of games. It's the sort of ultimate what if. Can you do better than Napoleon? And so therefore it's a fun and challenging game. And of course, with the La Bataille system, you've got the maps and the counters and all that stuff that sort of adds to the drama and the flair and the pageantry of that particular era. Now, I had the occasion and privilege to help playtest the second edition rules back in 2019 at Consim Expo, where my fellow French player was Warren Kingsley, and sitting opposite the table playing the allies, Tom Whitfield, Mark Kesmerick, and the publisher of the game, Ed Wimple. So we had a chance to play the game there, and while we were using the first edition pieces and maps, we were using then the newer rule sets, 5th edition rules for that. Now, recently I had a chance to play using the 2nd edition maps, counters, and rules at Consim here in 2022 in Tempe. So I'll have a little bit to share with that, having played both the earlier versions and of course now the recently published version. Let's take a look at some of the differences between the two editions. The first thing that most people will notice is that the maps are different. While they're not markedly different, they are different in a few areas. So the first, of course, has to do with the general color scheme. The older first edition maps were printed on a sort of a yellowy, creamish colored paper, so they tended to have a little bit more of a tan color to them. That tended to highlight more some of the brown colors on the map and in the artwork. The newer map is printed on white paper, and that tends to then let the green colors pop out and stand out a little bit better. Of course, this color scheme for the second edition Mont Saint Jean then matches the second edition Quatre Bras maps as well as the second edition Ligny maps. And so as a result, all of the second edition games looking at this particular combat during this campaign have a similar style, similar look to them, similar color scheme. Now, some of the artwork is different as far as the actual drawings of the buildings and things like that. It's a little bit cleaner, slightly different artistic styles from the original Rick Barber versions. And so if you like that sort of thing, great. But there's nothing to complain about. From a game point of view, some of the things that are important now is when you're assaulting the walled farms, you have to be attacking through the various gateways. And so the newer maps, it's clear to see where the gates are, and so which hex sides you need to be assaulting the buildings from. Of course, one of the other new features that they have with the second edition map is some new terrain. And the two pieces of terrain that show up that are different is principally severe sunken roads. And these are sunken roads that are much deeper than the normal sunken roads that are in this area. We find these severe sunken roads at the crossroads just north of the farm La Haye Saint in the center of the battlefield, and also by the Chateau Fishermont and the village Pampelette. This makes it difficult for formed infantry and artillery and cavalry to cross. Only skirmishers have the ability of kind of crossing this terrain. So from a defensive point of view, it provides some benefit for whoever is on the opposite side of it. The other thing that you're going to find with the newer maps is something called sodden ground or bottomlands. These are the green shaded areas that are adjacent to the various waterways running through the Waterloo battlefield. So these are the various streams and sort of swampy areas, lowlands, so to speak, that particularly based on the rain that had happened the previous day, are still very soddy, very muddy, and as a result, there's a penalty for units moving through these areas, hexes, that's going to reduce their movement slightly. So this is important because most of these waterways that have to be crossed are crossed by the Prussians, so that's going to delay their arrival by, in some cases, a turn, maybe more, depending on which routes they take. The next thing that you'll notice that's different is, of course, the exclusive rules. With the older original rule set, the booklet itself was printed in black and white. With the newer rule set, it's in color. There are illustrations. There's various and sundry maps and artwork from the time. And in that regard, it's a much better product. The scenarios themselves, the original set had 6 primary scenarios. This one also has 6 primary scenarios. There might be a few changes here or there, but the biggest change has to do with the fact that this particular second edition set was designed for the 5th edition rules. So there are some things that are part of that that then add more details in the exclusive rules. Things having to do with the artillery and with the leadership and replacement leaders. And so the command rules are a little bit more in line with what the 5th edition rules are. And so as a result, that is a bit of a change from the original set. Now, the other thing that's, of course, important from a gameplay point of view is that in the 2nd edition set, using 5th edition rules, we have things like the grand batteries. This basically allows the French with their grand batteries to fire twice per turn, which makes them very, very powerful. The other thing that's new to this particular set is the Old Guard charges. And so then this allows the Old Guard, several select units of the Old Guard, to do a special move and combat phase during the movement phase. So this can easily allow them to punch a hole in the line and kind of roll up the flanks of the Allies, where they can get in a couple of melees in the case of one turn. So those are some of the things that make this particular set different rule-wise. So at our game in Tempe, the French players took advantage of the rules and the way things are set up there to great effect. They engaged the First Corps very mildly, and then the Second Corps was engaged only slightly against Hougoumont. What they opted to do was basically run the guard and the heavy cavalry and the guns of the guard and most of the corps right up the middle of the battlefield, right off the bat. And as a result, by, I think it was the 3 o'clock turn or so, they were punching holes in the Allied line, while the Prussians were only just starting to arrive in any sort of force way out on the eastern side of the battlefield. So by taking that really direct approach, knowing what the situation was, they were going to be able to defeat the Allied armies before the Prussians could really make their presence felt. So given the way the scenarios are set up, particularly for the grand battle for this second edition. What are some things that can be done to maybe balance things between the two forces and make the game a little bit more realistic? One of the challenges that we always have with these types of games is that we have a God's eye view of the battlefield. We can see what's going on, we can see everything, and we also know when reinforcements are coming in and where they're coming in. So this then allows the players to act in ways that their real counterparts in history weren't able to do. Napoleon would have kept back some sort of reserve, not knowing when the Prussians are coming in or where they're going to be coming in. And so we don't, there's a couple of ways that we can model that. One might be to limit the ability of the Guard to be committed until maybe the Anglo-Allied forces had hit a particular morale level, or maybe one or more of the French corps had hit some sort of morale level, triggering then the need for the Guard to be committed. Another option might be to have the Prussians show up in a different spot, where maybe you randomly roll and they might show up a lot closer than way off on the far edges of the map. And therefore then as the French player, instead of you knowing, okay, it's going to take them, 2 hours to march from that side of the map over to where they threaten me, I'm just going to ignore them. They could just miraculously, as if they're parachuted in, show up a lot closer to the French lines, and that might force then the French player to keep a reserve. Another option might be to allow the Allies to deploy their forces in any particular way they like. One of the things that I noticed as playing the Allies was that they really can't move their forces very much. You don't have enough command points to really reshuffle things and put units in places that you'd prefer that they be. And as a result, then you're kind of stuck with what historically was the case. While the French can maneuver in many different directions, the Allies were kind of stuck. So giving the Allies the ability to maybe set up and dispose of their forces a little bit differently at the start might be very helpful, because then once the game gets going, they're only able to really react in many regards. So those are a couple of ideas on what, if you're going to play this game, you might want to think about or consider with whoever you're going to be playing with, that maybe kind of balance things out to kind of counter the old Guard goes in and wipes out everything type of action. Well, those are a few observations about the differences between the first edition and second edition of La Bataille de Mont Saint Jean from Clash of Arms Games. The group that played the game with me out there in Tempe for Consim, we all had a very good time playing the game. We were playing with the 5th edition rules, and that was a new set for most of the players. We found it worked really well for a team game like that, and in fact, everyone's pretty excited about us getting together next year to play another La Bataille title. If you have some suggestions on a game you'd like to see us play, or one that you think would be good for that type of situation, go ahead and make notes in the section below. If you're interested in joining us for that game in the future, also let us know. We're always looking for new players and to introduce new folks to the game system. If you haven't done so already, and why wouldn't you, hit the like button. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe. And if you know anybody who might be interested in this strange and esoteric type of, content, by all means, share this video with them, and so that way they can join our merry band of Napoleonic nerds and wargamers. As always, until our next episode, be well.